JP,
Hey man, how are you?
good to see you again.
Likewise.
Not a bad spot.
Not a bad spot at all.
Not our first time here.
No, we've actually been to this campsite a couple times before. It's kind of where this plan was hatched, was at this campsite, if I remember correctly.
I'll believe that story. I'm with it.
It's a good story.
I like
I think
it.
it was hatched at that campfire right over there.
So we're in Moab, Utah, southeastern Utah, in the Bureau of Land Management. Let's rewind a little bit.
Okay.
You just got done with the Tableau conference
Yeah.
in San Diego. Give me some quick highlights.
It was super interesting. I was particularly interested in going to the conference this year. Tableau's been acquired by Salesforce. They're making a lot of investments in AI, and it felt to me like that's a really good place for organizations to kind of take their leap into AI, if they will, because most organizations have some form of BI, business intelligence, where they've done some work to get together data in a data lake. They hopefully have some sort of emergence of a data governance structure. There's some staff literacy around all of this data coming together in a certain way to tell a story about the business. And that's really the fuel for AI, is your private data, the narrative, the story about your business, because otherwise it's the same data that everybody else has in the world model and the worldview of AI. And so I was curious to see Tableau's take on it and how they were looking forward in the future, because I do feel like for organizations, especially in highly regulated industries, that this is where their jumping off point in a lot of cases is going to be. And it was great. There were 12,000 or more attendees.
Wow.
It was at the San Diego Convention Center over 3 days, really across all walks of life and industries, all levels of the organization, from people that were working in BI to C-suite and executives. I spent time with some financial services executives, some healthcare executives, trying to get their take in some user-focused groups. It's clear that Tableau and Salesforce see some of the same vision, is that this is a jumping off point. Their starting point really is around natural language query, though, where you can get lay business users being able to sit down in a chatbot type of interface and say, can you create me a chart on shoe sales over the last 24 months? And it creates the chart for you. And then say, oh, that's great, but instead of a bar chart, can you make it a line chart? Is it possible to separate out the regions, north, south, east, west, Asia, US, whatever the case is? So it's this like interactive dialogue through natural language that people could have. I'd say that it's emerging. It's not there. The other thing that was interesting was Tableau Pulse. And we've used Pulse for a few clients, and I really am encouraged about Pulse, because what Pulse does is it combines natural language and storytelling capabilities of LLM with statistical analysis. And so once you get your metrics set up, not only does it look at shoe sales over the last 12 or 24 months, but it starts to identify trends, and it starts to identify contributors to those trends, so that business users can easily, well, why is this happening? And within a click or two, be able to drill down and get some deeper insight. And you can see the emergence there of where they're also then trying to get that next level question chatbot interface there, so that when you drill down a level or two and you want to continue to have a dialogue, you can chat interface. But that part's not quite there just yet.
Tell me a little more about what I hear you talking about as a bridge between a business organization that's using some form of business intelligence. Maybe they have, like you said, some business analysis capabilities. They have some form of data lake, like you're saying, some capability around data, but maybe not very sophisticated quite yet. Tell me more about that bridge to using, kind of getting to the next level, if you will.
I hate to say maturity model, but I think organizations, they're all at different starting points, right? So some of them are very sophisticated in their data lake. Some of them think they are, but they're really not. Some of them really realize that they're just kind of getting started.
If you don't mind me asking, if you're an organization and you're trying to figure out how to enter into AI, obviously, it's a buzzword, whatever it is.
Yep.
How do you begin to assess your maturity level and where you're at as an organization in terms of capabilities? And how do you start to plot forward? We know we have to modernize. Mm-hmm. How do we start walking towards that bridge and eventually cross it? how do I, as an organization, know where to even begin? And maybe that's too, not where you want to, where this is interesting to go to, but I think so many organizations don't know where to start.
I think that's right. So identification of the use case is, I think, something that's really important for organizations to do. And that's always this mix of, well, how hard is it to do and how much is it worth? So the things that are worth a lot and easy to do, go knock those off quick. The things that are worth a lot but really hard to do, it's going to take you a while to get there. And the things that are really hard to do and are not worth much,
Yeah.
why even talk about it? I tend to focus more in heavily regulated industries because that's our background and kind of where we feel the most comfortable is financial services, healthcare, pharma. And for those organizations, compliance is a real big deal, right? Either know your customer, SOX compliance, HIPAA compliance. I mean, there's a whole alphabet soup of things that they need to be aware of. And it's scary when you're starting to make this migration towards AI. But there are, I think, some pretty natural, easier to do, or big impact. I got my axes backwards here, but easier to do, big impact. Customer service is one of those things that kind of bumps up to the top of the list, and you're like, wait a minute, I can't just let AI loose on my customers. And that's where this phrase that we're kind of playing with around human in the loop kind of comes into effect. Because these organizations operate in these really complex environments, they have a lot of documentation for frontline customer service reps to follow, and it's voluminous. And so you can imagine a human being trying to solve a customer's problem and read through 800 pages of documentation in real time. So that's a real opportunity for AI. But you have to do it in a way that it cites its work, it's telling you where the answers are coming from, it's not hallucinating. And the human in the loop concept there is, and it has human verification. You're still given that sanity check. So that's an area that I think is important. But your question was really about how do I assess? And I think how do you assess is, you need to do a brainstorming exercise on the different functional areas of your business where there is potential application for AI. And then in some way you need to score the potential return on investment. And that can be through either reduction in cost, right? So everybody likes to talk about the fact that AI is going to wipe out all these jobs, and that doesn't always mean that that's the case. But it could mean that you need fewer people to answer those calls. But at the same time, it means that you might be able to answer more customers more quickly and actually unlock cross-sell, upsell opportunities. So some way to, a blue sky exercise to get all your opportunities out on the table. Then come back on top of that list of opportunities and to gauge them financially, either in dollars saved or dollars earned. And then you have to assign a level of effort to each of those. And I think for heavily regulated industries, maybe there's a z-axis there, which is risk. Am I going to end up on the front page of the Wall Street Journal if this goes wrong? That's kind of the third anchor that they need to evaluate through. And then it's like typical roadmap stuff. It's like, okay, this is our MVP, our phase 1, our phase 2, our phase 3. Here's our roadmap and some checkpoints along the way so that you're not embarking on a 3-year exercise with no value in sight. You want these little checkpoints along the way where you're getting some value back out of it.
These checkpoints are interesting to me. If you're looking ahead at a 6-month, 12-month, 18-month roadmap to implementing AI comprehensively throughout an organization, what might be some success criteria in that roadmap that are going to give a business some indications that they're on the right track?
I think it's important to say kind of first and foremost that the AI models are quite good at some things, and in some things they're not that great at. And sometimes you just don't know. But it's also important to state that a couple of things. One is they're the dumbest they're ever going to be today. And that was true yesterday, and they're smarter today than they were yesterday, and they'll be smarter tomorrow than they are today. The same goes for your team, is that their competency and their skill set of being able to embrace these tools is something that you have to foster and nurture as well. And that starts as just basic stuff of using it in your daily life before you even get to use cases where you may need to feed some of your own data into it, need to do that in a private way. From that starting point to your question of what are some of those milestones and measurements along the way. In one particular project that we did where we were looking at a customer service use case, and it is absolutely a work in process, and part of that comes into data quality, which I'll talk about at some point in the discussion today. But oftentimes when you're doing these AI pilots, the questions and answers are ethereal in the sense that you ask something It gives you an answer, may or may not be right. Then the next question comes up and you ask it something else and it gives you an answer, may or may not be right. And before you know it, you're 5 questions in, 5 answers in, and you don't remember what the first question, the first answer was exactly. So how do I know that it's giving me right answers? How can I measure that in some sort of quantitative and empirical way? We started out very simple in the MVP. Let's just manually log. Logged, we created a table, and what it was is 3 columns, and then the first column is what did you ask it? What was the prompt? The second column was what did it say? What was your answer? And the third column was it helpful or not? And explain. And real basic stuff, right? But every time they asked a customer service question, they just cut and pasted it in there. When it returned an answer, they cut and pasted it in there. And then after the fact, when they had a little bit more time and could be reflective about it, they said, that was a good answer. This was kind of a good answer. This was a good answer. That was a terrible answer. It should have been this. That question and answer pair is a really good way to fine-tune the weights in the model. And where I see that evolving to beyond an MVP is that the system in a more traditional structured SQL type database is automatically doing that for you. So as you ask a question, it's already inserting a row in a SQL database of this is the question. When the AI returns a response, you're already capturing that response in the next column in the SQL table row that this was the response. And then for the user, they have a thumbs up or a thumbs down that they can hit in the user interface to grade it, and then maybe provide a note if it's a thumbs down of what they think the answer should have been. So I think one milestone should be kind of logging your success rate. And I think in that first go around, we were at like 55% accuracy on question and answers. What we found is that some of the users that had been in the business a long time, had tons of experience, actually performed not as well with the AI as brand new users, which was great in the customer service function because most of them are short tenured to begin with. Part of that was generational. Part of it was the way that they asked the questions. And so I found a lot of times that reframing the question would actually provide the right answer out of the LLM. And this was an LLM that was trained on a vector database. It was a private implementation. It was behind the firewall. What that suggested to me is that one of the milestones that you have to think about, one of the steps you have to think about as you're road mapping your way to this is what's my training program with my staff for things like prompt engineering? Like how do they know, how do we teach them to ask good questions to get good answers?
That's fascinating. The customer service use case, I think, is like a great one because it's, most people can kind of grasp what we're talking about, I think, in that sense. But if I am thinking about a near-term roadmap for a customer service organization in your business, there's elements of how do I train the staff? There's constraints with your staff already, like you mentioned, short tenured. What training on how to do prompt engineering is kind of a basic one. What are some other areas that might be useful to train a new organization on when it comes to interacting with an internal LLM?
With an internal LLM, I think it's a little bit different. I'm going to broaden that question just a bit to say just an LLM in general. And a lot of organizations kind of came out right out of the beginning and said, don't put any data, any customer data, any PII, any private financial information into a ChatGPT, a Claude, a Gemini. And I think that's good practice. The balance you have to walk there, though, is that becomes so restrictive to your staff that they're scared to put anything in there that you're actually inhibiting innovation. And so that's where I think the internal LLMs come to play. What is an internal LLM? It's an LLM that sits behind your firewall, that you could literally unplug the network cable of the machine and you could still interact with it and answer questions. And there are a number of these that are trained on worldviews. Meta has put out several that are open source that will run behind the firewall now on the Olama platform. And so what that gets you is everything from the Odyssey and the Iliad to the works of Socrates to the tax code is already in these things. What they know nothing about, though, is the stuff that is unique to your business. And so one of the best ways to deal with that, at least right now, is still creating a vector database, which takes your documents and embeds them that then can be referenced in a way and used by the LLM. The one thing that I think a lot of people don't know is it doesn't have to be an either or. It can be a hybrid. Your vector database can be private on your documents, and you can still use a ChatGPT, a Claude, a Gemini by tokenizing and using an API key and passing that stuff through and backwards and return, rather. And so I lost the train of thought on
Yeah,
your
I
original
mean,
question.
it's not really that important. I think, the internal LLM is something that I think a lot of people probably aren't aware of. But these practices around, if I'm a customer service rep, I'm trying to, level one, level two, whatever, and I'm trying to solve questions for a customer, I don't want to be scared to use the tool.
Yes.
And if I've been trained, hey, don't do this, don't do that, I can do this, I should do that, how do you design a system that becomes a little bit more foolproof, where they can't make mistakes and they can just go to town?
I'll tell you a few things that we're thinking about. I don't know that we've solved it completely. I don't know that anybody's solved it completely. But there are, I think, approaches that are of merit to consider here. So one is, if it truly is a behind the firewall LLM, then you're pretty safe to put about anything that you want that you would consider confidential data into it, because it's not leaving your firewall. I do think it's a good practice that you're separating out PII and HIPAA data wherever you can, even if you're using an internal LLM. It's just good stewardship to just kind of keep those things out of the way. The training aspect of it is training is good, but then you don't want to be in the process or the business of slapping people on the wrist when maybe they don't kind of fully internalize the training. So one of the concepts we're toying with is that if we're retrieving an internal document, let's say that I have a document that governs my relationship with the customer, and I have a customer service rep that wants to ask questions about it, instead of embedding everything up front into a vector database, can we on demand retrieve the document that governs the customer relationship through a redaction process, redact out any of the PII in a templated fashion, embed it on demand, and then open the prompt for people to ask questions about? And that sounds like a lot to do, but all of that can happen in milliseconds, kind of behind the scenes.
Right.
And I kind of like that concept because I'm not building this huge vector database that maybe in some cases increases my ability to hallucinate. I'm focusing it narrowly to just this customer. I am doing it on demand. I am redacting the PII and the sensitive information, and I'm only feeding the governing language into the vector database, dropping it into the LLM prompt, and then using the LLM to be able to answer questions. That's a thought process we have right now.
It makes me think of a redaction agent.
It is. Yeah, I mean, and by the way, this customer service stuff, the next evolution of this, I think everybody's talking about agentic AI right now, and like, who knows the timeline of that? But it's not too far to go from a customer service chatbot that's assisting a human, and once you get to high 90% accuracy on that, then getting to a customer service bot that is assisting a customer without a human in the middle, to then getting into some statistical analysis that know that customers that have this product, that have this question, probably are in market for this other product you sell, to kind of become an agentic AI agent for some sort of cross-sell, upsell. You can kind of see that road walking there. That's not something that I think organizations are going to be at in a year. Maybe in that 3-year to 5-year time frame, that kind of starts to evolve that way. But I do think that the customer service use case evolves into a really good inside sales use case as well.
Well, for what it's worth, we use HubSpot at our company for our CRM.
Yep.
And we were poking around some resources, and I got an AI generated email later that summarized kind of everything we were looking at and applied to some of the questions we'd been asking. And then about a day or two later, I got an inbound email from a sales rep related to the content we were discussing. So I think there are some companies that are already doing some of what you're talking about.
Absolutely there. And I think Apollo's trying to do some of this stuff. I think Reply.io is also trying to do some of this stuff. HubSpot obviously is a natural B2B place for this. But think about that. That means that right now, at least in a embryonic form, your competitors have access to some of these kinds of tools. And so kind of sitting on the sidelines as this stuff evolves is a dangerous place to be. Like, some safe experimentation is pretty important right now, I feel like.
Well, that's why I was asking about, how do you self-assess your own BI capabilities? How do you start to develop some kind of roadmap and not get left behind?
Yeah. On the BI side, I mean, people go dashboard crazy, right? So it's like, hey, we have this great visualization tool. We got some data in the data lake. I'm going to go build all these charts and graphs and then just going to publish them out there. And I've literally seen organizations that have thousands of reports. They love to talk about the fact that they have thousands of reports. And if you were to pull up the last used on the majority of those reports, some of them are never. The majority are a long, long time ago in a galaxy far away. And the ones that are getting used, maybe they have some frustration about the information that's on them.
Sure.
And I like stories. I'm a talker, right? So I like storytelling. And so what is the story of your business that you're trying to tell? Where are sales coming from? What are the major contributing factors to that? And what does that upper funnel look like? Once they become customers, what causes them to stay? What causes them to leave? What's the average time that they stay? What are the risk points in the relationship? And if you can't tell that story, at least conceptually, if I needed the perfect BI solution to run my business, it would explain this story to me every day. If you don't know what that story is, you're not really ready to start building dashboards. Because the dashboards are going to it's not designed around the information the executives need. The executives want to wake up every morning and they want to know, what are the contributing factors to my sales? Are my customers staying? Are they happy? Am I converting at the right rate? Am I closing at the right rate? And just scripting that story out with just think about an algebra, like a word problem in school, where you're kind of plugging in your variables along the way of today we got this many new applications and the application rate to placement rate is 40%, compared to previously this.
Yep.
And you just walk through that chain of a customer life cycle and tell the story hypothetically, and then you come back and you implement that in a series of analytics and BI to bring that story to life. I think that assessing where you're at was kind of your question there. I think too many organizations jump straight to the report creation component. The other thing that the storytelling approach helps you do is to find the edges of whether you have the right data in your data lake or not. Because the questions that you ask determine the data that you need in your data lake and the frequency at which you need that data there to be able to answer those questions. So I like that approach to assessing where you're at and what your journey looks like.
The dashboards to me in the context of AI feel like a 2D version of what you're actually looking for as a leader in an organization. Mm-hmm. Dashboards, like you said, are extremely helpful in terms of curating data and getting a baseline in terms of what kinds of metrics or what things do I care about in my organization. But realistically, the next level is, okay, what do I do with these graphs, tables, whatever it is, so that I can improve my organization or tighten those metrics? Mm-hmm. And that's where it seems to me there's a huge value of being able to have a dialogue with the data, remove the 2D dashboard. Yeah. I mean, obviously you want to have, we're not saying get rid of metrics. That's kind of not the conversation, but it's if you're trying to enact change in an organization, you need to be able to have a conversation with what's going on. An AI, a chatbot interface, whatever, is going to allow you to interact with that in a way that can actually be useful.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like if I'm measuring trains and, 72% of my trains are arriving on time and that's on my dashboard, that's useful to know. But what I want to know is what are the different things going on in the background in the data set that might yield some patterns to help me move that 72% to 79%.
You're spot on. This has been a growth experience for me. I love charts and graphs and numbers. I always have. And it breaks my heart to learn that not everybody does. But at the end of the day, I think a lot of executives are looking for the story about their business. I keep coming back to that word. But if you think about the metaphor dashboard and where it came from, like a dashboard on a car, and you and I both drove here today, you got a lot of stuff on your dashboard. You got a speedometer, it tells you how fast you're going. You've got a gas gauge that tells you how much gas you've got. You've got, time to your destination, the temperature of your vehicle, and all of these things. The reason you want to know your speed is, one, it kind of determines when am I going to get there? Am I in compliance? Right?
Yep.
I really don't care about the temperature of my car until it's wrong, right? Unless I'm just super nerdy about it. But if the temperature is off, I want to know what's causing it. I don't really care that it's 212 degrees. I more so care of is this a problem? And why? Why is this a problem? The 212 is somewhat meaningless to me, although it's a metric that kind of everybody focuses on. And so I'm kind of playing that dashboard metaphor forward. But I think most CEOs would love to walk into their business in the morning and have a story right there for them. Guess what? You're on track with your goals. You're ahead of your goals. And the reason you're ahead of your goals are this, this, and this. And if you did just a little bit here, that could improve even more. Or you're not on track These are the things that are holding you back. Here's the contributing factors to that are holding you back. And then in a series of phone calls, they could go take some action that would have an impact on their business that day, as opposed to looking at a bunch of numbers and saying, well, that means that I'm probably not going to be on path. I wonder what's causing that. Let me call 3 people. Let me get an answer to this. Let me break down this number. They really just need the information about what's going on, what's the health, what story is that telling me, so that I know which levers to go pull to get a better outcome.
I've often seen a new CMO take over in an organization and have a lot of distrust about the metrics and dashboards that they see. Inaccurate data or not trusting the data. How would you address that in terms of application of AI? And if I'm that CEO, how do I know that the insights that are being given to me that morning why can I trust those?
There's a really idealistic answer to this question, around single version of the truth and some of those things.
Let's put it in context of, I love the idealistic answer, but people are probably looking for how do I do this today?
Well, that's kind of where I was going to go, is I think everybody reaches for the idealistic answer, but I had an example today that I ended up spending a few hours on, where depending on how the question was asked, there were more than one right answer. What is the ending number of units sold for this particular partner for the last 3 years? If I looked at the end of the year, the last 3 years, what is the number of units that have been sold? There was an answer that was generated, and I took a look at it, and I came up with a completely different answer. It was basically in how the data was being approached and which viewpoint it was from the distribution point of view or from the actual units point of view. And so I highlight that example to say, I see this over and over again in organizations, is that definitions matter. Every business unit has a definition of what it means of units sold at the end of the year for a distribution partner. And until you align that really at the C-suite within your organization, this will always be a problem, and it leads to tremendous mistrust, even though the 3 different people that answered that question were all accurate in the answer that they provided to the question.
Wow.
But they were working from 3 different definitions of what that question meant. I felt like an attorney, like nitpicking
That's
language.
what I was
going
to say. I was like, that sounds like a contract, like a legal contract. It always starts with definitions.
it absolutely does. And I'm finding that is some of the hardest work to do. Doing the math, putting the data into place, those are all can be hard things to do, but they're nothing compared to getting executives on the same page about what a set of definitions mean in the business that everybody agrees on and that we don't deviate from, so that when their respective lieutenants go out and answer the question, they're singing from the same sheet of music. That is by far harder than the technology.
I love this line of thought because I think it's a near-term opportunity for organizations that want to begin leveraging AI throughout their organizations. They have to start somewhere. And if there's some prerequisites. So we talked about data quality.
Yep.
We talked about we should talk a little more about security, especially for regulated industries and compliance. But also these definitions that we're talking about, which is how do we define things even within a single organization, right? It's not just a cross-functional question. I think it can be, a marketer may have a variety of definitions around the same idea as well. So I like these because I think if you're a CEO and you're thinking, okay, this is a company that's been around for, 15, 20 years, we're doing $1 billion in sales. How do I start? I know we're not leveraging AI the way that we need to be. I know that HubSpot is already doing some crazy stuff that we're not even thinking about yet. Definitions is a good place to start. Data quality is a great place to start.
Yep.
Defining use cases is a great place to start. What are some other quick things? And then we should talk about data, security for these different industries.
I like that train of thought, Jed. I think back to the definitions piece there for just a minute is, if a human being can't interpret the meaning of your question consistently because they're not working from a single set of definitions, the AI is not going to get it any better. Probably a lot worse. The same thing is true with data quality. So I think you're covering a lot of the good points there, is that data quality, consistent set of definitions will help you answer the data quality question. And then the identification of use cases by going through an exercise of blue skying across functional areas. It's a cross-functional team that does this. I think you want to bring together a cross-functional team so that people feel involved, but you've also got the right stakeholders there. and then a prioritization framework to figure out business return versus level of impact, and what can be publicly consumed, what has to be private. Your data governance rules apply on structured and unstructured data in AI the same way they apply to everything else that you do. And then I think you wanted to dive into the data security and privacy question.
Yeah, I'm going to keep holding off on that one.
Okay.
Because I have another follow-up here, which is most organizations have a fairly familiar pattern to most people in terms of how they're organized. You have a C-suite, CEO, whatever, and then you've got marketing, product, engineering, sales, customer service, and maybe there's some other silos related to that business.
Mm-hmm.
Should AI be its own silo? Maybe you want to have a data science team, maybe it's an AI team. I'm familiar, folks who leading edge data scientists for ChatGPT or Meta or whatever, these are not affordable hires,
Yeah.
They're, Fortune 50 companies are able to fund very expensive, human capital teams around these functions. You have engineers, senior engineers that are making $1 million, $1.5 million a year. How should you architect your organization in the context of AI?
It's a great question. We should also talk about talent in addition to security as well, because I think there are implications for your talent roadmap also. I really want to say no to the question of should AI be its own function within the business. Let me explain that. I don't think I can say no, but I really want to say no. In the short term, I think the answer is that it has to have a champion. A fairly senior champion that is both business competent and technical competent to drive it into your organization. The reason I say I really want to say no in the long run is the metaphor I use for AI is it's a hammer. And carpenters that embrace the new hammer more quickly are going to build better houses faster and cheaper. That kind of puts it into the category. Maybe some people blow me up in the comments about this, but it kind of puts me in the category of email is also a hammer. At one point, email was a game changer and a hammer. You don't see a chief email officer in a company today. And same way you don't see a chief electricity officer in a company today. It will ultimately become a utility fabric of your business of which you weave solutions, business processes, and outcomes. You will still need to serve customers. You will still need to sell. You will still need to account. You will still need to have compliance. You will still need to have operations, but they will sit on top of the fabric of AI. I think this is kind of a roadmap view of where this will end up. In the short term, you need a czar that can drive it into your organization because it is different. It requires some different thinking. It requires both business competence and technical competence, and it requires an individual that is collaborative, that can work with your various stakeholders to make them feel like that they're involved and heard and that their use cases are getting addressed. But if done well, I think it should become an operating layer of fabric or utility in your business, and it would no longer have a chief AI officer. That's a working hypothesis, but you don't see chief email officers in companies today.
That's true. You don't see chief text message officers, chief phone officers, but you do see chief information officers.
You do, yeah. Who manage the fabric of email, telecommunications, data, all of those things. And everybody complains about them, right? Everybody loves to complain about IT because it takes too long, it costs too much, all these kind of things. But yes, you do have someone that manages all of that, but not individual function heads.
Give me a little more color on what a AI Czar might look like for a company trying to build this roadmap and cross the bridge. You gave me some clues.
Mm-hmm.
To me, it sounded a little bit like a product manager from what you're talking about, but maybe compare and contrast with some other, executive roles and how that chief AI officer or AI czar, AI implementer in chief might look like. Because how do you hire that, right? It's a talent question.
Ideally, you've got somebody inside that really has a passion for this and wants to go after it. But it's like a lot of innovation roles in the sense that I think you need someone who is maybe a generalist in the sense that they have a really good command of the finances of your organization. They have a really good command of the operations of your organization or of business operations. They understand technology. So it is a very cross-functional person.
Okay.
Or a person that is very good at working and collaborating with a cross-functional team. There's a heavy project management aspect into this as well, right? I think a tiger team approach, you think Santa Fe Institute kind of approach to innovation, where you've got an operations person, a technical person, your compliance person, that are your kind of stars that are dedicated to this team for this innovation project. And it's the orchestra conductor that sits over the top of that is engaging your individual business departments and stakeholders to surface out those blue sky list of use cases, and then has the credibility to sit with the CFO and talk about the level of impact and the level of effort to kind of gauge what do you do first, second, and third. I think it's like a lot of other innovation roles in your business. I like the notion of someone that's a generalist because it really does require a lot of areas of your organization coming together in an orchestrated way. A really, really strong project management executive that is really good at building stakeholder consensus is something I think is fundamental to this.
What strikes me as very challenging for organizations who are trying to do this is internal resistance within the organization, where if you're a level 1 customer service rep, or even leaders in that organization or leaders in the sales organization, might really have a hard time playing along with an AI Czar.
Yes, I mean, is your thought because of concern of job loss or change in the way we do things?
Yeah, I think change, first and foremost. There's a rabbit over there.
Nice. Is that right? Yeah, Czar.
Yeah. Change, first and foremost. As we both know, leading change in an organization is very hard.
Mm-hmm.
People are resistant to doing things different than they've been doing it in the past. AI represents massive change for most people, and it also carries with it the stigma of, perceived job loss.
Yeah.
And let's be real, it's not wrong all of the time.
It's not wrong all the time. I'll give you 2 different stories, 2 different applications of AI that answer your question in 2 different ways, and they're in reverse chronological order. So I've got one that is much more customer service focused. It's much more on unstructured data. And it is a lot of collaboration with frontline customer service reps. And I kind of wondered that same thing. Is this the fear of I'm training Optimus robot.
Coming for our jobs.
That's right. I'm very happy to report in that one, that has not been the reaction. The reaction I've got is, oh my gosh, this is going to save me so much time. I can do all of these other things for the customer. And that's super encouraging, especially in frontline customer service reps, because their level of frustration at just like arcane systems and hard to answer questions, like they love that idea because then they're like, I can do what I really like, which is solving customers' problems.
Yep.
So that was one reaction.
That's cool.
Another reaction, so this was a computer vision application of AI, and this one was 5 years ago. And so we've been at this game a long time on the AI front. And I'm sure you can relate to this example, is that you buy a bookshelf or something from IKEA, and it comes with a pack of screws. And the instructions say that you need to put 6 of these screws in these different places. And you open up the packet of screws, and it has 4 in it. And you're like, uh-oh, I need 2 more of whatever this is.
Yeah.
Right? I think everybody can relate to that experience. And when you go to a store that sells those kinds of things and you walk into this gigantic aisle that has thousands of those kinds of things and you're like, what the heck is this? I need 2 more of whatever this is.
Yep.
So that was the computer vision use case with the senior executive freely admit, yeah, that aisle is a disaster. This would solve so many customer problems. This is greatly needed. At the data science team level, though, they had this approach in mind that was not AI, that they were going down the path of. And so we ended up in this scenario of a bake-off of, okay, well, you try to solve the problem this way. We'll try to solve the problem this way. We'll start out with 10 screws. We'll compare accuracy and results. And that's our first milestone. And then if champion beats challenger or challenger beats champion, we'll expand to 20 screws. And so on. And so how long do you need for that? 2 weeks. Okay, we were thinking more like 6 now, but I think we can do it in 2. And so we trained an AI implementation on 10 screws to recognize features of screws. So not trying to figure out the exact screw, but to figure out, well, this one's made out of bronze. This one's made out of zinc. This one has a hex head drive. This one has a Phillips drive. This one is similar to 1 inch long. This one is similar to 1 1/4 inch long. And the combination, the combinatorial approach of those features narrowed down your SKU list to 1 screw. Because when you have a 99% probability that it's feature A, B, and C, There's only one part number in the catalog that meets that.
Right.
And it is on aisle 12, bay 4, shelf 3. And so it was really, really quick to do. We go back to the data science team. Here you go. Test the accuracy. Wow, it's 97, 98% accurate. Well, that's great on 10 screws, but what if you had 20? 2 weeks later, come back with 20 screws. Same level of accuracy. Well, that's great, but there's a lot of screws in the screw aisle. Probably needs to be like 50 or 100. So we come back a week later with 100 trained. And it was all of these excuses of, well, it should be more, it's just not practical, all these kinds of things. What I kind of figured out is that there was a disconnect between what the senior executive wanted to do and what the internal data science team wanted to do, or was afraid of, that, this was my funding and my roadmap for the next year. They just solved the problem in 2 weeks or 3 weeks. I need to throw up some roadblocks here. And so the two different examples, one highlights the scenario that you're talking about, and the other one I was very pleasantly surprised about. It was the middle technical layer in that instance that was the difference. The frontline people working with the customers were all about more efficient ways to solve the customer problem. But the people that were incented to solve the complex problems in maybe different ways were very resistant to
Interesting.
It was fascinating.
That is fascinating. I love that story because I think there's a speed element.
By the way, 5 years ago is when this occurred. Never moved forward past POC state. That same problem has just come back around. Same exact company.
Wow.
Problem is still not solved.
Wow.
5 years later, and it was done in 2, 3, 4 weeks in POC. 5 years ago.
And there's so many more questions there.
By the way, that whole team is no longer there.
Right.
So
it didn't work out either way.
Didn't work out either way.
That's funny. That's fascinating. Yeah, I think the speed element is just fascinating to me.
Yeah.
The speed that you can quickly solve problems with a high degree of accuracy.
Yes and no. So the complete inverse of those two scenarios. So on the screw example, because it was effectively structured data, and what I mean by that is that even though it was photographs of screws, the screws didn't change. They're well formed, right? And part number 1, 2, 3, 4 always looks like part number 1, 2, 3, 4. So the speed of solving that problem was very, very fast. On the customer service example, where there are tens of thousands of pages of documentation that have been written by 30 different authors over 2 decades that read like a ransom note that sometimes a human can't pick up and make sense out of. While there's much more willingness to solve that problem, the quality of the input data is a real issue.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting. Both of them have their pros and cons.
Let's talk about data in highly regulated environments.
Mm-hmm.
What are some base rules for compliance or care or security, however you want to call it, for financial services, pharmaceuticals, healthcare, insurance, maybe, any large steward of PII?
Yeah. Anytime you're bumping up against, KYC, PII, HIPAA, SOX compliance, those types of things, this comes into play. And one of the approaches we've been really using on this is if we can avoid any of the PII elements in the actual AI use case or implementation, the better. And so I talked kind of early on in our conversation about this notion of, can I retrieve a single document that governs a single customer relationship on demand, redact on demand, and then vectorize and embed at the moment of needing to do a query? And in that instance, we're even doing that in a private LLM behind the firewall, but even the private LLM is not getting access to any PII because we don't need it. Once we know that we're dealing with customer 1, 2, 3, 4, and here's the governing document for their relationship, I don't care anymore what their customer number is. I don't care anymore what their name is. I don't care anything about their address information. I am now down to the governing document. And so the LLM can work on just the relevant parts. This reductive mindset of if you don't need it, why have it, I think is a good guiding principle. If you need it, then you definitely have to be behind the firewall.
Another use case that I'm thinking of is a doctor.
Yeah.
Everyone understands a doctor. You're with a patient, and there's factors about the patient, their height, their weight, gender, medical history, ancestral history, whatever it is, genes, whatever. There's data about that individual that might be really relevant in a conversation with AI.
Absolutely. I will say kind of to that, though, is that I'm a short guy, and I am a little fatter than I used to be. But the good news is there's a lot of short, fat guys out there. Relevant to the conversation about my potential treatment or conditions absolutely matter that I'm a short, fat guy and I'm not as young as I used to be. I don't have to tell you which short, fat guy. So I don't need to know that it's JP. I just need to know that it's a short, fat guy that's not as young as he used to be.
And what about when we think about more even deeper tailored answers to a specific problem, where there's characteristics about that individual or even an organization, like CPA, maybe another use case could be a CPA analyzing an organization, and there's a lot of details about that organization, and it's specific. There's no other organization that looks like it, let's say.
Well,
we can also skip.
No. You're getting me away from my my short fat guy analogy. So I was going to continue that for a moment, right? So,
well, I didn't want to, because I mean, if we wanted to follow that one, I think, like, I have a friend who has a healthcare startup, and they're sending supplements based off of someone's individual genetic code. And the idea is that you could converse with the AI and the app about their own.
Yeah, if you're getting down to actual genetic sequencing, then I'll change my answer.